The husband said the mom, sister, and kids will live here in the millionaire's big apartment. Julia had finally done it. After years of scrimping and saving, peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, bargain bin dresses, she'd bought the house. Not just any house, mind you. A gorgeous Victorian in Willow Creek, complete with a wraparound porch, begging for lemonade, and a garden practically screaming for roses. It was her escape, her kingdom, a big middle finger to the chaos of city life and the wreckage of her past. 5 years married to Mark. Bless his easygoing, soft, proudly showed him around the place. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, the antique doorknobs she'd painstakingly polished. She expected, maybe a hug, a "wow, honey, you're amazing." Instead, Mark's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "This is fantastic, Jules. Mom, Sarah, and the kids will love it here. Plenty of room for everyone." The world tilted. Julia's meticulously built sanctuary, her symbol of independence, was about to become a family commune. Her stomach churned. The porch swing she'd imagined peacefully reading on now envisioned crammed with noisy, sticky-fingered kids. Her rose garden trampled. The next few days were a minefield of awkward smiles and clipped sentences. Julia buried herself in work, anything to avoid the inevitable showdown. Then, over spaghetti and meatballs, her attempt at normalcy, Mark dropped the bomb. "So I was thinking Mom could move in next month. Sarah's lease is up, and the kids really need a backyard like this." Julia's voice trembled. "Mark, we need to talk. This house is mine. I bought it." Mark looked genuinely confused. "But we're married." "Jules, what's yours is mine, right? Besides, family comes first." Something inside Julia snapped, a protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed. She stood up so fast. Her water glass went flying, splattering red sauce everywhere. "No, Mark, not this time." She walked out, leaving him staring at the mess. And the next morning, gone. A note on the counter. "Need some time to think. I'll be back, but things need to change." She drove, hours, until she reached a secluded cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. No cell service, just the wind in the pines and the roaring silence. Meanwhile, Mark sat alone in the Victorian, the weight of his assumptions crushing him. Had he really known Julia at all? And when she came back, would there even be a we anymore? Ei, antes de continuarmos com essa história incrível, preciso te fazer um alerta importante. Muitos inscritos têm relatado que o YouTube removeu suas inscrições sem aviso. Dá só uma conferida rápida no botão vermelho aí embaixo para garantir que você ainda está inscrito no canal. Não quero que você perca nenhum conteúdo exclusivo que vem por aí. E já que você está aí, deixa aquele like poderoso que me ajuda muito com o algoritmo. Ah, e me conta nos comentários. De qual cidade você está assistindo? Adoro conhecer cada pessoa incrível que faz parte dessa comunidade. Sua participação faz toda a diferença. Vamos interagir. Meanwhile, Mark sat alone in the Victorian, the weight of his assumptions crushing him. Had he really known Julia at all? And when she came back, would there even be a we anymore? He picked up the phone, dialed his mom. Needed to talk, to vent. "Mom, Jules left. I screwed up big time. She said she needs space." His mom, always practical, always a fixer, sighed on the other end. "Mark, honey, you should have talked to me first. Women are complicated. But don't worry, I'll handle it. I'll talk to Julia." Mark hung up, hope flickering. Maybe Mom could smooth things over. He started cleaning up the spaghetti mess, the red sauce now dried and crusty. He felt like a complete idiot. Later that evening, his sister Sarah called, her voice tight. "Mark, Mom told me what happened." "Seriously? You told Julia we were all moving in?" "Dude, not cool." I thought it would be great. A family thing," he mumbled, feeling even smaller. "Family thing? This is her house, Mark. She worked her butt off for it." Sarah's words stung. He spent the night tossing and turning, replaying the conversation with Julia, seeing her face when he dropped the bombshell. He hadn't even considered her feelings, her dreams. He just bulldozed right through them. The next morning, the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door, and there stood a woman, maybe late 50s, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. "Mark?" she asked. I'm Carol, Julia's mom." Mark's jaw dropped. "Julia's mom? But Julia always said her mom was dead, died when she was little." He just stared at the woman, speechless. Carol shifted uncomfortably. "I know this is a shock. Julia, she doesn't know I'm here. I had to see her, to explain." He stepped back, letting her in. He couldn't even process what was happening. Julia's mom, alive? Standing in her house? "Julia, she thinks I abandoned her," Carol said, her voice trembling. "And I did, but I had my reasons. I was young, scared. I couldn't handle it." Mark led her to the living room, his mind reeling. This was insane. "I remarried, had another family," Carol continued, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never told them about Julia. It was a secret I buried deep. But now I need to tell her the truth, before it's too late." Then the bombshell dropped. Carol reached into her purse, pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to Mark. It was a picture of Julia as a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Standing next to, Mark stared at the other person in the photo. A man he knew. A man he'd seen just last week. His own father. The blood drained from Mark's face. He looked from the photo to Carol, then back to the photo, his heart pounding in his chest. He's her father?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Carol nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Mark, your father is Julia's father." You two are..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Mark didn't need her. "Two." The truth slammed into him with the force of a freight train. He and Julia weren't just husband and wife. They were half-siblings. "Yes, Mark, your father is Julia's father. You two are..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Mark didn't need her to. The truth slammed into him with the force of a freight train. He and Julia weren't just husband and wife. They were half-siblings. The room spun. Half-siblings? Julia? His Julia? He felt like he was going to throw up. Spaghetti and meatballs, the Victorian, their life together. It all twisted into some sick, twisted joke. He stared at Carol, his mind struggling to process the impossible. His father, his dad, good old Bill from the hardware store, had a secret life? A secret daughter? How is this even possible?" he managed to croak out. Carol's shoulders shook. "He was young, a bit of a wild child. He met me one summer. We fell hard, fast. Then he disappeared. Said he couldn't handle being a father. I was devastated, alone." She wiped her eyes, her voice cracking. "I didn't know where he went. I didn't know he'd started a whole other life, a family, until I saw a picture of him in the local paper. Years later, I knew it was him. Older, settled down, but it was him." Mark was numb. He looked at the photo again, at little Julia's smiling face. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt betrayed, disgusted, lost. And then the doorbell rang again. He almost ignored it, but Carol gave him a pleading look. "It might be Julia. Please." He shuffled to the door, his legs feeling like lead. He braced himself, ready to face Julia, ready to tell her something. He didn't know what. He opened the door. It wasn't Julia. It was a police officer, a tall, serious woman in uniform. "Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice grave. Mark nodded, his heart pounding. "I'm afraid I have some bad news. There's been an accident at the Blue Ridge Mountains. A car went off the road, down a steep embankment." He felt his breath catch in his throat. The Blue Ridge Mountains, that's where Julia was. "We believe the driver was Julia Henderson." The world went silent. His ears were ringing. He swayed, reaching for the doorframe to steady himself. Is she?" he stammered, unable to finish the question. The officer's expression softened slightly. "I'm very sorry, sir. There were no survivors." Mark stared at her, his mind refusing to accept the words. Julia? Gone? It couldn't be. Not now. Not like this. Suddenly, Carol screamed. A high-pitched, piercing scream that echoed through the house. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark knelt beside her, his own tears starting to flow. He put his arm around her, trying to offer some comfort, but he was numb. He didn't know what to do. Then he noticed something strange. The police officer hadn't left. She was still standing in the doorway, watching them. Her expression was odd, almost pitying. "Officer," Mark said, his voice trembling. "What's wrong? Is there something else?" The officer hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There's something you need to know, Mr. Henderson. Something we found at the scene of the accident." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, sealed plastic bag. Inside was a note. She handed it to Mark. He took the bag, his hands shaking, and looked at the note. It was handwritten in Julia's familiar scrawl. He read the words, and his blood ran cold. "If you're reading this, I couldn't go through with it. I know the truth. And I know you know too, Mark. I'm leaving. For good. Don't try to find me." But it wasn't the words that chilled him to the bone. It was the signature. The note wasn't signed Julia Henderson. It was signed Sarah Miller. He read the words and his blood ran cold. "If you're reading this, I couldn't go through with it. I know the truth. And I know you know too, Mark. I'm leaving. For good. Don't try to find me." But it wasn't the words that chilled him to the bone. It was the signature. The note wasn't signed Julia Henderson. It was signed Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller, his sister? What in God's name was going on? He looked from the note to the cop, then back at Carol, who was still sobbing on the floor. His head was spinning. This was all too much. The officer cleared her throat. "Mr. Henderson, we need to ask you some questions. About Sarah Miller, about your wife, Julia, and about a series of, shall we say, unusual financial transactions we've uncovered." Financial transactions? What did that even mean? I don't understand, Mark stammered. The officer sighed. "It seems Miss Miller has been systematically draining Julia Henderson's accounts for the past several months. Large sums of money transferred to offshore accounts." He stared at her, dumbfounded. Sarah? Stealing from Julia? Impossible. "There's more." The officer continued, her voice grim. "We also found traces of a powerful sedative in Julia Henderson's car. The same sedative Sarah Miller's been prescribed for years for her anxiety." The pieces started to fall into place, a horrifying, twisted jigsaw puzzle. Sarah had planned this. She'd framed Julia, made it look like a suicide. But why? But why would she do this? Mark whispered, his voice cracking. The officer hesitated. We believe it was for the money, Mr. Henderson. And perhaps for you. For him? He didn't want to believe it. Sarah had always been a little possessive. But murder? And framing Julia? Suddenly, Carol stopped sobbing. She looked up at Mark, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and understanding. The will, she gasped. Julia's will. Who's the beneficiary? Mark's stomach dropped. He hadn't even thought about the will. I don't know, he said, his voice barely audible. The officer's gaze hardened. We do, Mr. Henderson. Sarah Miller is the sole beneficiary of Julia Henderson's estate. Everything. The house, the investments, everything. It all clicked into place. Sarah had wanted Julia gone so she could have the money and him. She'd manipulated him, played on his good nature, used him as a pawn in her twisted game. And then, the most horrifying thought of all slammed into him. The spaghetti and meatballs. The night Julia left. He remembered Sarah calling him later that night, sounding concerned, offering to come over and keep him company. He'd refused, feeling too raw, too guilty. But what if she'd already been there? What if she'd seen him clean up the spaghetti mess, seen the water glass he had picked up to put in the dishwasher after it had sauce splattered on it, and taken it to be tested? He looked at Carol. She was staring at him, her eyes filled with horror. The DNA. She whispered. Oh God, Mark, the DNA, the spaghetti, the water glass. Sarah had the perfect opportunity to get Julia's DNA. And if Sarah knew that Mark's own father was Julia's father, and he knew she was the beneficiary, the note would lead the cops to thinking he had done it. He felt his legs buckle beneath him. He sank to the floor, next to Carol, the weight of the truth crushing him. He wasn't just a fool. He was a target. Sarah hadn't just framed Julia. She'd framed him too. And as the police officer reached for her handcuffs, Mark knew his life was over. The Victorian, the lies, the betrayal, it had all led to this, and he was about to pay the price. But then, just as the officer was about to snap the cuffs on his wrists, a voice rang out from the doorway. A voice he hadn't heard in years. A voice he thought he'd never hear again. Hold it right there! Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, looking older but unmistakable, was Julia Henderson, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a man, tall and imposing, with a familiar glint in his eye. Bill Henderson, Mark's father. Hold it right there! Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, looking older but unmistakable, was Julia Henderson. And she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a man, tall and imposing, with a familiar glint in his eye. Bill Henderson, Mark's father. The cop lowered her hand, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Carol gasped, a sound like a drowning bird. Mark just stared, his brain short-circuiting. Julia? He croaked. But the accident, the note. Julia stepped forward, her eyes blazing. It was a setup, Mark. All of it. She gestured to the man beside her. Dad helped me. He knew something was wrong. He's been keeping an eye on Sarah for weeks. Bill Henderson, the man. He'd always known as a pillar of the community, a regular at the hardware store. His dad stepped forward. Sarah came to me weeks ago, saying she was worried about Julia. Said Julia was suicidal, acting crazy. She wanted me to keep an eye on her, to make sure she didn't do anything drastic. His voice shook. I believed her. I wanted to help. Then his face hardened. But then I started seeing things. Sarah's lies didn't add up. Julia continued, her voice tight with fury. She's been isolating me for months, Mark, planting seeds of doubt, whispering lies in my ear. She wanted me out of the picture so she could have the house, the money, and you. The officer, recovering from her initial shock, spoke up. Miss Henderson, we received a report of a fatal car accident involving a woman matching your description. We also have a note, purportedly written by you, confessing to suicidal intentions. Julia shook her head. That was Sarah. She must have staged the whole thing. The note, the car, everything. Mark felt a surge of anger, hot and violent. He looked at Carol, who was still on the floor, her face buried in her hands. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to break. Something. And then Bill Henderson dropped the bomb. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice low and grave. He looked at Julia, then at Mark, his eyes filled with pain. Something I should have told you both a long time ago. He took a deep breath. Julia, you're not my only daughter. The room went silent. The only sound was Carol's muffled sobs. What are you saying, Dad? Mark asked, his voice trembling. Bill Henderson closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength. Sarah is also my daughter. I had an affair with her mother, years ago, before I met your mother, Mark. Before I met you. The world tilted again. Sarah, his sister, his manipulative, scheming sister, was also Julia's half-sister. They were all connected, tangled in a web of lies, secrets, and betrayal. He looked at Julia, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. He looked at the police officer, her expression unreadable. He looked at Carol, her body racked with sobs. And then he looked at the doorway. Standing there, framed by the light, was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, held at gunpoint, was his mother. Hold it right there! Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, looking older, but unmistakable, was Julia Henderson. And she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a man, tall and imposing, with a familiar glint in his eye. Bill Henderson, Mark's father. The cop lowered her hand, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Carol gasped, a sound like a drowning bird. Mark just stared, his brain short-circuiting. Julia? He croaked. But the accident, the note! Julia stepped forward, her eyes blazing. It was a setup, Mark. All of it. She gestured to the man beside her. Dad helped me. He knew something was wrong. He's been keeping an eye on Sarah for weeks. Bill Henderson, the man he'd always known as a pillar of the community, a regular at the hardware store. His dad stepped forward. Sarah came to me weeks ago, saying she was worried about Julia. Said Julia was suicidal, acting crazy. She wanted me to keep an eye on her, to make sure she didn't do anything drastic. His voice shook. I believed her. I wanted to help. Then his face hardened. But then I started seeing things. Sarah's lies didn't add up. Julia continued, her voice tight with fury. She's been isolating me for months, Mark, planting seeds of doubt, whispering lies in my ear. She wanted me out of the picture so she could have the house, the money, and you. The officer, recovering from her initial shock, spoke up. Miss Henderson, we received a report of a fatal car accident involving a woman matching your description. We also have a note, purportedly written by you, confessing to suicidal intentions. Julia shook her head. That was Sarah. She must have staged the whole thing. The note, the car, everything. Mark felt a surge of anger, hot and violent. He looked at Carol, who was still on the floor, her face buried in her hands. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to break something. And then Bill Henderson dropped the bomb. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice low and grave. He looked at Julia, then at Mark, his eyes filled with pain. Something I should have told you both a long time ago." He took a deep breath. "Julia, you're not my only daughter." The room went silent. The only sound was Carol's muffled sobs. "What are you saying, Dad?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. Bill Henderson closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength. Sarah is also my daughter. I had an affair with her mother, years ago, before I met your mother, Mark, before I met you." The world tilted again. Sarah, his sister, his manipulative, scheming sister, was also Julia's half-sister. They were all connected, tangled in a web of lies, secrets, and betrayal. He looked at Julia, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. He looked at the police officer, her expression unreadable. He looked at Carol, her body racked with sobs. And then he looked at the doorway. Standing there, framed by the light, was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, held at gunpoint, was his mother. "Don't anyone move. Not one damn inch," Sarah screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. The gun, a small silver pistol, trembled in her hand. Mark's mom, bless her, looked terrified but held her head high. "Sarah, put the gun down," Bill pleaded, his voice strained. "This isn't you. You don't have to do this." "Shut up, Dad," Sarah spat. "You ruined everything. All my life you've been there for Julia, helping her, favoring her. You never gave me a chance." Mark's brain was racing. He had to do something. Anything. But what? He couldn't risk his mother's life. "Sarah, listen to me," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I know you're hurting, but this isn't the answer. You don't want to do something you'll regret for the rest of your life." Sarah laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Regret? I already regret everything. I regret being born. I regret being your sister." Then her eyes landed on Julia. "And you think you're so perfect, so deserving of everything. Well, guess what? You're not. You're just a bastard child, a mistake." Suddenly, Carol stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness. "Don't you dare talk to her like that," she screamed. "Julia is worth 10 of you." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Oh, really? And where were you all those years, Mom? Huh? Where were you when I needed you? You abandoned me just like he did." She gestured wildly with the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. Mark could see the fear in his mother's eyes. He had to act fast. "Sarah, please," he begged. "Let Mom go. We can talk about this. We can figure something out." Sarah hesitated, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. For a moment, Mark thought he might have gotten through to her. But then, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's right, Sarah. Let her go. Let everyone go." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Standing in the doorway, behind Sarah, was the police officer. And she was holding a gun, pointed directly at Sarah. "It's over, Sarah," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "Just drop the gun and no one else has to get hurt." Sarah's eyes darted back and forth, her mind clearly racing. She looked at Mark, at Julia, at her father, at her mother. Then she looked at the police officer. And then she smiled. A slow, killing smile that sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "You think you've won?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You think you figured everything out? You have no idea." And with that, she turned the gun on herself. Before anyone could react, she pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, followed by a stunned silence. Sarah crumpled to the floor, a dark stain spreading across her chest. Mark stared in horror, his mind unable to process what he had just witnessed. His sister, dead, by her own hand. Then he noticed something strange. The police officer wasn't moving. She was still standing in the doorway, her gun still raised, her face a mask of triumph. And then Mark saw it, a small, almost imperceptible nod, a nod directed at someone behind him. He turned around, his heart pounding in his chest, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing there, behind him, was Carol, and she was holding a gun pointed directly at Julia. But it wasn't just any gun. It was the same silver pistol that Sarah had used. The same silver pistol that Carol herself had given to Sarah just a few weeks earlier. And that's when Mark knew. Sarah hadn't been acting alone. Carol had been in on it all along. Carol, a gun pointed at Julia? What the actual? My brain short-circuited. Sarah was bad enough. A twisted sister with a thirst for cash and my affections? But Mom Henderson? Sweet Carol, who baked apple pies and sent birthday cards on time. This Carol? Julia's face was a mask. A stunned, frozen mask. Dad, good old Bill, looked like he'd been sucker punched. The cop looked like she just realized she'd walked into a freaking soap opera. "Mon?" I choked out. "What are you doing?" Carol's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. But her hand, holding the gun, didn't waver. "She's a threat, Mark. Always has been. She took you away from us." "Wait. What?" "She's lying," Julia screamed, finding her voice. "She's the one who planned this. She manipulated Sarah. She wanted me dead." Carol's face twisted with rage. "Shut up! You think you're so innocent? You stole my son. You stole my life. This was insane. Beyond insane. My head was pounding. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, a twisted family drama where everyone was a villain. And then, Dad did the unthinkable. He stepped forward, right in front of Julia, shielding her with his body. "Carol, don't do this," he said, his voice pleading. "Please, you don't want to hurt her. You don't want to hurt any of us." Carol's face was a mess of tears and rage. The gun trembled in her hand. I thought she was going to crack. But then the front door burst open, and standing there, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was a woman. A woman I hadn't seen in over 20 years. A woman I thought was dead. My real mother. Not Carol. My real mother. The one who'd walked out on us when I was a kid. The one I'd spent years hating. She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the scene, taking it all in. The dead body of Sarah. The gun in Carol's hand. The shock on our faces. And then she spoke. "Hello, Mark," she said, her voice cool and calm. "Long time no see." But what she said next, that's what shattered everything. She looked directly at Carol, her eyes hard as steel. "It's over, Mom," she said. "It's over, Mom," she said. Carol just stared, mouth agape, the gun still wavering. Dad froze, his arms still protectively around Julia. Julia looked like she might actually faint. Me? I was officially done. Fried. My brain was a scrambled egg, my life a reality show gone horribly, horribly wrong. What are you talking about, Eleanor?" Carol stammered, her voice shaking. "I am your mother!" Eleanor, my actual mom, just laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Honey, you're barely capable of boiling water, let alone raising a child. You were hired, Carol. Hired to play the part." "Hired? What the actual... Again? Hired by who?" I managed to croak out. Eleanor's gaze flickered to me, a brief flash of something I couldn't quite read. Guilt? Regret? Nah, Probably just indigestion. By someone who wanted to keep a close eye on things, she said, her voice cryptic. Then she turned back to Carol. Someone who knew you'd be easily manipulated. Someone who knew you'd do anything for a little bit of attention. Carol's face was turning purple. You bitch! She screamed. You used me! Of course I did, sweetheart, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescension. You were perfect for the part, so desperate to be loved, so eager to please. And then the bomb dropped. Eleanor reached into her purse, pulled out a small, worn photograph. She held it up for everyone to see. It was a picture of a man I knew, a man I'd seen just last week, the cop, the damn cop who'd been standing in the doorway the whole time. Detective Miller here, Eleanor said, her voice smooth as silk, is my daughter, my real daughter. The room went silent. I mean, silent. Even Carol stopped sobbing. My brain was officially rebooting. You're working together? I stammered. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. Oh, honey, we've been working together for years. Haven't we, Sarah? Detective Miller, Sarah, lowered her gun, her eyes glinting with amusement. Indeed we have, Mark. Indeed we have. And then the real Sarah, the one lying dead on the floor, started to move. A gasp, a cough, her eyes fluttered. Open. Plan B, she croaked, a weak smile on her face. I stared, my jaw on the floor. A bulletproof vest? A staged death? This was beyond anything I could have imagined. Detective Miller, no, Sarah, walked over to the other Sarah, knelt down, and pulled her into a hug. Good job, sis, she whispered. You played your part perfectly. But why? I stammered, looking at Mom and Sarah Miller, then at the Sarah on the floor, then at Julia and my dad. All the Sarahs and Moms were making my head spin. Eleanor sighed. Because, Mark, you're a liability. You know too much. And you're about to find out even more. She turned to Julia, her eyes cold as ice. And as for you, Julia, you're just in the way. And with that, Eleanor raised her hand, snapped her fingers, and the other Sarah, the cop Sarah, pulled out a syringe filled with something dark and viscous, something that looked suspiciously like, "What are you going to do?" I yelled, finally snapping out of my daze. Mom, what is all this? Eleanor stared at me for a moment, her face unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across her lips. Oh, Mark, she said, her voice almost sad. You're about to find out everything. The truth about our family. The truth about why I left. The truth about who you really are. And you, Julia, I'm so sorry. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, with the wrong blood and genetics. It all could have been avoided if your mother wasn't so selfish. She nodded to Sarah, her cop daughter, as she advanced on Julia. It's time for you to learn that some things, Mark, are better left a secret. And with those words, she looked back at Sarah again and slowly shook her head. With what Sarah heard, she abruptly stopped in her tracks, dropped the syringe, and fell to her knees as silent tears streamed down her face. And that's when the house exploded. It wasn't a boom, not exactly, more like a whoosh, a sudden rush of air that knocked me off my feet. The windows shattered inwards, showering us with glass. The walls groaned. Then, darkness. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor, coughing, my ears ringing. The air was thick with smoke and dust. I could hear screams, moans. Had the furnace blown? A gas leak? I didn't know. All I knew was that the house, Julia's dream house, was coming down around us. I tried to get up, but something was pinning me down. A beam? Debris? I couldn't see. Julia! I yelled, my voice cracking. Dad! Mom! Silence, except for the crackling of the fire, which was growing stronger, faster. I struggled, desperate to get free. I had to find them. I had to get them out. Finally, I managed to wriggle out from under whatever was holding me. I stood up, wobbly, and looked around. Total chaos. The living room was gone, reduced to rubble. The walls were collapsing. Flames were licking at the ceiling. And then, through the smoke, I saw her. Julia. She was lying on the floor near the fireplace, her face covered in soot. She wasn't moving. Julia! I screamed, running towards her. I knelt down beside her, checking for a pulse. Nothing. No, I whispered, shaking her gently. And then her eyes fluttered open. Mark, she whispered, her voice weak. Julia, you're alive, I cried, relief washing over me. The baby, she gasped, clutching her stomach. The baby? What baby? My mind raced. Had I heard her right? What are you saying? What baby? Then, like a lightning bolt, it hit me. Julia had been acting strange lately. Tired, moody. She'd been craving weird foods. Pickle ice cream? I'd assumed it was because of all the trauma she was going through. But now? You're pregnant? I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. Pregnant. Julia was pregnant with my child. And we were trapped in a burning house. Surrounded by death and destruction. It didn't seem possible. It didn't seem real. And then, just when I thought, things couldn't get any worse, a voice rang out from the darkness. A voice that sent a chill down my spine. A voice that I recognized instantly. Well, the voice said, dripping with malice. Looks like we have a little surprise. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing there amidst the wreckage was Eleanor, and she was holding a gun. But it wasn't pointed at Julia. It was pointed at me. It's time to finish this, Mark, she said, her voice cold as ice. It's time for you to pay for your father's sins. And then she smiled. A chilling smile that revealed the true horror of the situation. Because standing beside her, holding a matching gun, was Dad. My dad, Bill Henderson. And he was smiling too. I'm so sorry that this is happening, Mark. But your mother and I did what we thought was best for everyone. I hope you can understand that. Goodbye, son. Eu olhei para meu pai. O meu pai. O cara que me ensinou a andar de bicicleta. Que me ajudava com o dever de casa. Que sempre esteve lá. Aquele cara estava apontando uma arma para mim. Eu não entendo. Eu consegui dizer. A voz, embargada. Nós nunca queríamos isso, Mark. Meu pai falou, seus olhos marejados. Mas você era uma ameaça. Você sabia demais. Sua mãe, Eleanor, ela sempre cuidou da família. Sempre nos protegeu. Eleanor sorriu. Sorriso frio que me fez tremer até os ossos. Seu pai e eu temos uma longa história, Mark. Uma história que você nunca deveria ter descoberto. E Julia, bem, ela era apenas dano colateral. Dano colateral? Ela estava falando sobre matar Julia, sobre matar o bebê. Uma raiva que eu nunca senti antes tomou conta de mim. Eu não me importava com o que aconteceria comigo. Eu tinha que proteger. Julia, eu tinha que proteger meu filho. Eu não vou deixar vocês fazerem isso. Eu gritei, me jogando para frente. Mas antes que eu pudesse alcançá-los, uma explosão ecoou pelo ar. Não veio da arma. Veio de fora. O teto desabou. As paredes tremeram. E de repente, o fogo se intensificou, engolindo tudo. Eleanor gritou. Meu pai cambaleou para trás surpreso. E no meio do caos, uma figura surgiu. Um homem alto, forte, com um extintor de incêndio na mão. Ele começou a atacar as chamas, abrindo caminho em direção a nós. Eu o reconheci instantaneamente. Era Tom, o ex-noivo de Julia. Como ele sabia? Onde estávamos? Como ele sabia o que estava acontecendo? Eu não fazia ideia. Mas naquele momento eu não me importava. Ele nos salvou. Juntos, Tom e eu conseguimos tirar Julia da casa em chamas. Meu pai e Eleanor desapareceram na fumaça. Sarah provavelmente estava no inferno agora. Nós saímos cambaleando da casa, tossindo, nossos pulmões cheios de fumaça. As sirenes soavam ao longe. Julia estava fraca, mas viva. O bebê nós não sabíamos. No hospital, depois de horas de agonia, finalmente recebemos a notícia. Julia estava bem. O bebê estava bem. Nós tínhamos sobrevivido. Mas a nossa vida nunca mais seria a mesma. A verdade sobre minha família, sobre Eleanor e meu pai, era demais para suportar. Eu não sei se algum dia vou conseguir perdoá-los. Julia e eu nos mudamos para longe, para um lugar onde ninguém nos conhecia. Nós começamos de novo. Nós tivemos nosso bebê, uma menina linda que chamamos de Hope. Ainda tenho pesadelos. Ainda me assusto com barulhos altos. Mas eu tenho Julia. E eu tenho Hope. E isso é o suficiente. Ou pelo menos é o que eu tento acreditar. Porque às vezes, quando estou sozinho à noite, eu me pergunto: o que realmente aconteceu naquela casa? O que aconteceu com Eleanor e meu pai? E qual era a história completa? Você precisa se inscrever agora. Não perca as próximas histórias exclusivas que vão explodir sua mente. Esmague o botão de like agora. Ajude o canal a crescer e trazer ainda mais conteúdo incrível. Inunde a seção de comentários com suas reações e teorias sobre este final chocante. Queremos saber o que você pensa. Compartilhe instantaneamente este vídeo com pelo menos 5 amigos que precisam conhecer este desfecho. Só os verdadeiros fãs compreendem a importância de apoiar o canal. Este é o momento para demonstrar seu apoio. Não espere nem mais um segundo para compartilhar.